We're reading from the book Love Came Down at Christmas, Daily Readings for Advent by Sinclair Ferguson. It's a book furnished to us by Truth for Life, a ministry of Alistair Begg. And today we're on chapter 4. Anyone for patience? Love is patient. 1 Corinthians 13, verse 4. A colleague once told me about a very embarrassing experience. He had flown out of town for a speaking engagement. The flights were badly delayed, and so he arrived at his hotel very late and exhausted. The young man at the reception desk asked for his name, looked for his reservation, and after a few minutes said apologetically, "I'm sorry, sir, but there's no record of a reservation in your name." It was the straw that broke the camel's back. More pointedly, it destroyed the theologian's patience. He flew off the handle. Eventually, the young receptionist found him a room and asked my friend to sign the paperwork. He wrote his name and then the address of the well-known theological seminary where he taught. The young man looked on in amazement and gasped, awestruck, "You're really Professor blank from blank seminary? I just became a Christian a few months ago. What a privilege to meet you." It can happen to the best of us. Something makes us snap. Later, we protest in embarrassment. "I don't know what came over me. I'm usually very patient." But that's not true. It's just that we have never really been tested. Only impatience-stimulating situations show whether we are patient or not. The Christmas season will present plenty of opportunities to test our patience. Packed trains, traffic jams, crowded shops, orders we made on websites arriving too late or without batteries, not to mention difficult relatives or overexcited children. In the course of his teaching on love, Paul now turns from negative to positive characteristics of love. It's interesting, don't you think, that it begins with patience. The English word patience can be used to translate several different words in the Greek New Testament. Paul's verb here, makrothumio, means to be long-tempered. He seems to have associated this with humility and gentleness. Check Ephesians chapter 4, verses 1 and 2, and Colossians chapter 3, verse 12. It shows itself in the way Christians bear with one another. The Bible contains some great examples. A quarter of the book of Genesis is devoted to describing how God developed patience in one man. The story begins with a naive and impatient 17-year-old boy who then experiences 14 years of suffering, injustice, and disappointments. As a result, he learns humble trust in God. But then it turns out that these long years of painful training have prepared him to exercise the kind of patience that will be needed to negotiate the following 14 years as Prime Minister of Egypt. Now he has the wisdom to manage 7 years of bumper harvests in order to cope with 7 years of famine. The young man's name, of course, was Joseph, and his story is told in wonderful detail in Genesis chapters 37 through 50. The end result? His brothers come to Egypt and eventually discover who he is. The whole family is reunited with him. But when their father dies, his brothers fear that his kindness has been only temporary and that his apparent long suffering has been simply a slow building up of a head of steam that will propel his revenge. They do not need to fear because Joseph has in fact learned to be patient, gentle, and long-suffering. He has learned how to love. What is the explanation? His brothers meant evil against him, but he knew that, quote, God meant it for good to bring it about that many people should be kept alive, as they are today. Thus he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. Genesis chapter 50, verses 20 and 21. Joseph's story is like a movie version of Romans chapter 8, verse 28. We know that for those who love God, all things work together for good. God has ways and means of making everything work for good for his people. He has a purpose for their lives, When you know this, it builds long-suffering into you. The secret to this kind of patience doesn't lie in natural disposition. There is a weakness to be found somewhere inside you, even if you haven't yet discovered it. Some of us seem to be amazingly patient with big things, but then we fly off the handle at trivial ones. But love is always patient, always long-suffering. It can be patient in difficult situations because it knows God has a plan. It can be patient with difficult people because it knows they are in God's image. Genesis 1 verse 26. Love is not a commodity that comes down from heaven waiting to be unwrapped. No, it is actively exercising patience with other people and with the circumstances God has ordained. It is being able to take the long-term view, knowing that nothing can happen to us without the will of our Heavenly Father. Love acts and reacts without tensing up in irritation because life isn't fair, without blaming other people for what we are experiencing, and without planning how we'll get even. Have you ever wondered about these words in Charles Wesley's hymn, "Hark the Herald Angels Sing"? Late in time, behold him come, offspring of a virgin's womb. Was Wesley complaining that Jesus was too late, that he might have, should have come earlier? That would be a misunderstanding of Wesley. He knew well enough that Jesus was born when the fullness of time had come, Galatians 4 verse 4. But as the phrase late in time indicates, it was after centuries of preparation. What does this say about the Son of God who became flesh? He was patient. He waited, as it were, until all was ready, when David's royal line had reached perhaps its lowest point in the home of Nazareth carpenter and a teenage mother. The child in the manger is the perfect example of divine patience. The rest of his life gave expression to it. How long-suffering he was. He experienced opposition virtually from the moment he stepped into the world. Later, he tasted misunderstanding in his own family, who didn't trust him. And then those disciples, so often foolish, as the most critical juncture in his life, they disappointed him. "Have I been with you so long, and you still do not know me?" Jesus asked Philip. That's John chapter 14, verse 9. "Could you not watch 1 hour?" he asked Peter, James, and John. Mark chapter 14, verse 37. And then, on top of it all, there was betrayal by a man who had broken bread with him a matter of hours before. Then an illegal trial, false witnesses, a judge with no moral fiber, a wrongful conviction, and then the spitting, the abuse, the humiliation, and the shame and agony of the cross. If you want to know what patience is, what long-suffering looks like, all you need to do is to read through one of the Gospels. Yes, love is patient. Jesus was patient. And if the Lord of loving patience lives in you, your love will be patient too. But there's more. For if you think about it, the greatest illustration you know of his long-suffering is the way he has been so long-suffering towards you. Let's reflect on what we just heard. Who or what has tested your patience in the past few days? How did you respond? How do you imagine Christ would have responded if he were in your shoes? And finally, we'll close with a prayer by Samuel Rodegast, who lived between 1649 and 1708. Whate'er you, Lord, ordain is right. Your holy will abides. I will be still, whate'er you do, and follow where you guide. You are my God, though dark my road. You hold me that I should not fail. Wherefore to you I leave it all. Whate'er you, Lord, ordain is right. You never will deceive me. You lead me by the proper path. I know you will not leave me. I take content what you have sent. Your hand can turn my griefs away, and patiently I wait your day. Whate'er you, Lord, ordain is right. Here shall my stand be taken. Though sorrow, need, or death be mine, yet I am not forsaken. My Father's care is round me there. You hold me that I shall not fall, and so to you I leave it all. Merry Christmas.